When Omotara James reads, there's nothing cartoonish, nothing overly kinetic, but she is unyielding, and you are moved, because her work is so positioned in the power of vulnerability.
Because I believe you cannot stop a thing from existing, even if you kill it, is how I loved you. Because in my thickest vibrato, I sing for Sarah, even though she cannot hear me, is how I loved you.
Welcome to Outsider In, a podcast featuring outliers who redefine the culture, in a space where Black poets are treated like royalty. Today, my guest is writer, editor, and visual artist Omotara James. James is the author of the chapbook Daughter Tongue and the breakthrough poetry collection Song of My Softening, which just won the Lambda Literary Award for Best Lesbian Poetry. I'm lucky enough to call her both colleague and friend. Welcome, Omotara. So let's just get right into it. How are you?
Hello. So good to sit with you.
I'm really excited to have you just in general. I'm excited to have you as the first guest on this new venture, but also the Lammy. Let's just talk right about that right away. I mean, what the ceremony was weird this year, right?
Yeah, it was the first virtual ceremony. And I think that's because there's been some restructuring within the organization. So this year only, it was virtual. And next year, it'll go back to being in person.
Okay. So where were you when you found out you got nominated, and what was it like getting that win?
Speaking of outlier, well, so my story for finding out is a little atypical because when I went on and plugged in to attend the ceremony virtually, there were some technical difficulties. So there was no audio, and I was really tired that day, and I just assumed I wasn't winning. I don't know why, but I just didn't really think it was inside of the realm of possibility. So I took a nap. I took a nap. And when I woke up, I had all of these phone notifications, and my good friend Ricardo called me with a huge congratulations. And I said, what? I said, really? Are you sure? But it was just a joy and a huge surprise, an honor, a delight, all those things. I just thought it was a little surreal.
That story doesn't sound too crazy compared to all of the winner stories I've heard before. I didn't think I was going to win. I turned the show off, or I took a nap, or I didn't write a speech, and lo and behold, right? That's amazing.
I know, but they're so great because they're going to put the ceremony on YouTube. And so if you didn't get to say your acceptance speech at the time, you can send them one. So now the past few days, I've just been thinking, oh my goodness, now I have all this time. It's one thing when you write an acceptance speech and you don't think you're going to win, which I didn't even do because I thought there was no chance. But it's another thing when you know your acceptance speech will be heard and you want to say the exact right thing. And it's really not about the perfectionism. It's just about the gratitude for community and wanting to do your best to express. How do you express the inexpressible when you're so grateful to be a part of a community that just still teaches and informs your relationship with yourself on a daily basis? How do you express that?
It's beautiful that you said that, because it's sort of where I wanted to go to, because, you and I have been sort of in a discourse for a while now about sort of what it's like in the publishing world for us as individuals, Black people, outliers for whatever capacity. And I want to sort of get into that, from either of our angles, but really I think more so I want to highlight, what has it been like after the book launch, sort of maybe rediscovering or discovering for the first time community surrounding the book. Have you found new family? Have you been reintroduced to family? How's that been?
Oh my gosh. It's a roller coaster. No matter how it goes, it's going to be so variable. There are going to be so many ups and downs and so many just unexpected delights. And I feel like that is the key phrase for the evening. It's unexpected delights because my book reached communities that I mean, I knew they existed, but it's one thing to know and it's another thing to be affirmed by them. It's another thing to be welcomed by them. And I kept having that experience over and over again. People with whom, I really shared very like little demographic, history, but they really just opened to it in a way that was so heartfelt and authentic. And I received a lot of emails, which was overwhelming. I received a lot of emails from people who have their own stories. I have a poem that's kind of thought of as my coming out poem, though I don't really feel like I came out. I just said what was what. I did come out later in life, to use that terminology, which I think is a little outdated, but I did come out later in life, and I have this poem called Haircut, and I'm discussing the interaction between the speaker and the speaker's mother, who's like more traditional. And so there's all of this pressure in that moment. And so in my emails, people were really responding to that one. And it was just a heartening example of how connection is built through really personal experiences. And those personal experiences are universal when they're written from a true place. I write poems for everyone, but I am an adult. I'm an adult woman. I'm writing my audience. I think of them as being adults, but a lot of people, like, kids in high school have reached out with like questions about the work. I always think it's funny when a kid obviously is reading my work for the first time and they're like, "Oh, can you talk about what's happening in this poem?" They're reaching out for clarity, which I'm like, okay, low key, you want me to help you with your assignment, and I appreciate your hustle. That took some real initiative to reach out to the author herself. You really do want clarity. You don't just want to extrapolate. You want to get it from the horse's mouth. So that always cracks me up. But also I'm thinking, wow, maybe this is their first interaction with a poet, with a Black poet, with a fat poet, with a lesbian poet. And that just always really gets to me, because I know that when I think about my own experiences with poets and first experiences, I still remember them to this day, and it makes an impact. And so I always try to reach out with the same generosity that I've been shown. And it's just, it's like brand new every time that happens. I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not completely obsolete. Someone in high school is reading my poem and thinking, yeah, this is what I chose to work on, because there's a connection there.
You said a lot of things I want to pick back up on, but one thing I sort of want to do, just to sort of ingratiate people. I mean, in the beginning, they heard a clip of you reading from the night I heard you first, at the Lambda Literary Retreat. And you talked a little bit about Haircut, but for straight from the horse's mouth, what would you call your work? Like, how would you describe it to someone who doesn't know it firsthand, and B, maybe isn't even that much into poetry? How would you describe your work to the novice?
I would describe it as an invitation to your own interiority, right? Like, I think that there's so much happening on a daily basis that requires our concentration, our discipline, our energy. And because we're so good, some of us, at compartmentalizing, because it's what the world, really necessitates to function, I think something gets lost. There's, this interiority that isn't necessarily addressed. I guess what, like Buddhists refer to as that mindfulness. And my experiences as, like previously doing social work and just like teaching in general is I'm always looking to help connect people to their own personal agency, their own ability to stand at the crossroads of their life and say, okay, I get to make a decision, and then I live with it. And then these are the consequences. So that's also my personal mission. Like I'm always trying to reconnect to my agency because there are so many forces that are trying to pry my agency like away from me. So in doing so, I feel like that interiority where I get to kind of track how I'm not only affected by the world around me, but also just how I feel about it, like what I think about it, how I how I change as I learn and grow. That interiority, I think, is so precious. And I think the most interesting thing, like when I reach for, something by Audre Lorde, or if I reach by something by, Donica Kelly, or I'm reaching for their particular perspective, the way that they see the world means something to me because it's outside of my own experience, but also we all live in the same world and we all have experiences. And through their personal agency, I'm able to make a map of my own. I am someone who exists in so many communities at once and also at the same time, not at all. I am a child of the diaspora because my mother is Nigerian and grew up in Nigeria. My father's Trinidadian and he grew up in Trinidad, and they met in the UK, in Scotland. And I was born in the UK and lived in Scotland and lived in England. Those are where my first memories are based. Those are even my accent, when I was a kid, like everything, even my phonics now, like it comes from those places. So I would say I'm a third culture kid, but actually I'm a fourth culture kid because then we moved to America. And when I was growing up, that was the culture that informed my tastes, the comedy I loved, the dramas I loved, the fashion I wanted to wear. But also, I was also informed by my mother's culture and my father's culture. And I had so many family members who grew up in London because they went to school there. So they're coming back with that culture. So really, I had a very international and intersectional existence. And so I write about intersectionality. I write about being Black, which is, intersectional with being a woman, which is intersectional with being queer, which is intersectional with being fat. And what is most interesting to me is how living in all of the little compartments, right? How living in all of these little kind of bubbles of reality, how that has created my sense of culture and art and belonging. And do I feel like I belong somewhere, and where, and how that can be very fluid. So all of those things I think are relevant because, if you're someone who feels like you exist within or you straddle different intersectionalities, I think you don't have to be specifically Nigerian and Trinidad and British to understand what it feels like to have a double, triple, quadruple consciousness. And so that is the kind of work that really interests me. That's a lot.
Oh, that's gorgeous. And I mean, first of all, we have very similar backgrounds. My mother is from Brooklyn, but my dad is from Miami, and they met on a military base in England. And I was born in Ipswich, England, and my grandmother stayed there. She was a singer. That's why my mom was there in the first place. My dad was in the Air Force. They met there, got married, had me there. I'm a dual citizen. Just born right under the abolition of Margaret Thatcher's mandate that anyone born after 84 cannot be a dual citizen of the United States from American parents born on British soil. So,
Yeah.
so I just got right under the radar, you know. Um,
Yes.
and then my grandma stayed there and married an Englishman. So my grandfather growing up was some old white British dude,
Hmm.
and everybody in my family has lived over there. Did grad school there. So yeah, very much. And I think there's a feeling of I mean, from what you're describing, it seems like that's a lot of that intersectionality, those bubbles are what make your book so successful in those circles and outside of them, I think. Because like you said, everyone straddles different lines
Hmm.
automatically, so that's automatically relatable. But void of the snatching of our agencies too, our interiorities are very similar, everyone, right? Like that softness that we have to guard or aren't able to guard might look kind of the same in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Even when the presentation is different. And for me too, sometimes I have such a strong feeling, even no matter how fleeting it might be, that, I also don't belong anywhere, right? So I think that is a definite universal feeling that we have at different times in our lives. And I think that feeling all of those things made it more difficult for me when I began the, publishing journey, I'll call it, made it more difficult for me to kind of understand what to do and when, because eldest daughter syndrome, I didn't know who to ask. And I didn't know like what questions were appropriate. And I kind of felt like, okay, I'm a pioneer. I guess I'll just figure it out as I go. But I had wished that, I had had more guidance, like kind of upfront. If I could say, okay, I need you to tell me exactly what this is going to look like and how, and I don't mean like, speaking to my publisher, like I wish I had kind of like, I guess, a publishing, Sherpa or mentor or something to say, listen, these are some things to consider. I'm not sure what's important to you, but I kind of just learned things by trial and error. And now, like if I teach a workshop, usually like either the last workshop that I teach, or maybe just I'll string in a little bit along, like with each class, I'll just say, oh, and just so you know, when you begin publishing, think about this, or this will affect your chances of doing this. And I just try to let people know, because I went to a whole entire, MFA program, very distinguished, that I loved. And there was not this kind of practical uh, explanation and exploration of what it's like to exist within the industry. And I'm not entirely sure why. And, in my kind of immigrant sensibilities, I figured, okay, part of what going to an MFA is going to be like going to nursing school. Like when you go to nursing school, they tell you exactly what to expect and they give you the steps for how to do it. And yes, different people have different abilities and capabilities to be a nurse, but they're going to set you up for the realities of your industry. And then when I got to MFA, I just learned that that's not how MFAs work.
I think part of the issue too for folks like us and other folks out there is that even if that scaffolding were there, I don't know if they would know where to put us.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
And I think we might have gone wayward in another direction if we had relied maybe too heavily on someone directing us in the wrong direction. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
But that's also really easy to say in hindsight. I don't know. It's very very tricky. To your point, I love the romanticism of a grad program. Like I love, I do. Like I listen. I romanticized it prior to. I was like, I have never not worked. I am going to go hide away in a hobbit hole in London, and I'm
Mm.
going to write and read all day for more than a year, you know? And that lifted a lot, but the other end of the getting a book deal really feels like that whole luck factor they talk about when in preparation and stuff, which I know better, right? You know, I know we have to tempt fate. However, I do feel lucky in that regard, and maybe that has something to do too with it being a capitalist endeavor.
Everything to do with it. I mean, I don't want to be like crass, but publishing has a real pick me problem, because we just feel so lucky. And we are so lucky. It's a privilege to write. It's a privilege to have enough time to, however you come by it, to be able to sit down and reflect on life experiences, to think about craft, to have the privilege of the tools, whether that's a computer, a typewriter, to sit down and tell your story the way you want to tell it from your perspective. All of it is steeped in privilege, and I'm so grateful for that privilege. So to be able to do that, and then whether you're solicited or you send out your work, for someone to say, hey, I see the merit in what you're doing, and I believe in this work, and I believe in you, and I want to forward your voice and put your work out there. It's a privilege. However, the issue that, that rears its head is that once you're chosen, kind of the rigor of um, the work and the interaction becomes a little muddied. Listen, I do all I can to do to just get out of the bed every day and lead my life. I'm not the director of an MFA program, but I just don't understand looking back, and this is not just about MFAs. This is about like anything that you do. I don't understand how I never was like advised on how to like deal with a contract, or it wasn't even discussed, just those very practical things. Like, it's still shocking to me because I, if it's one thing to be empowered to do the work, but then after you do the work, if you're not empowered to like help usher the work into the world, I think that's just a huge failing. And that a lot of that comes from the fact that we look at it as, oh, we're so lucky to be chosen. Yes, we are lucky to be chosen, but that's not where like that rigor has to end. Then we must have to know how to best advocate for our work, because that is a long road. What I didn't realize is that, okay, I'm going to be my own publicist. I'm going to be my own personal assistant. I'm going to be like, unless you have the resources and the means, but who really has that? No one. Most presses don't even really have that. And that's because the presses are small. The independent presses are super small. Their overhead is smaller. And a lot of these really small presses, like when we say small press, that's a huge umbrella term, which is another thing I didn't realize, but I had an inkling like, okay, some small presses are more popular, probably because there's a legitimacy there. There's a track record, there's a history, and we see the books that come out of it that do well. But still, I didn't realize the huge variety that exists beneath the umbrella of small presses. And I have friends who have had horror stories working with small presses, not because the people at the presses were horrible. That's not the case. But at the really small presses, usually, we don't talk about how it's really like an unpaid volunteer position that is run out of someone's like passion and heart. And that is a beautiful but highly fallible system. And I had a friend whose first chapbook came out of a small press, and people were ordering it and they just never received their books.
What?
They just never received their books. And then she went back to the owner of the press, and there was a lot of back and forth. But then what no one teaches us is that, like, once you've like signed that contract, it becomes a whole thing. She wanted to just leave and the person wouldn't let her leave. But the backstory behind that, and this is not for reasons of gossip, but just to understand, is that, that the person behind that press was going through a lot of personal issues at the time. So everything stopped because it was a one person show. And for a lot of these presses, it's just one person, two people. Even for my press, I think they're the contact list is just like three people, like it's a lot of work, on top of very few people. And unless they're a well-organized machine, and I can say that Alice James is a well-organized machine, unless they're a well-organized machine, then, there's so much that could go wrong, and it's likely that it will. It's a lot. And so I felt like, while all of this was happening with my debut book, and I'm trying to like understand this, that, and the other thing, and how to get like more press here, and I'm writing people, and I'm doing all of this work that I just assumed, like on TV, you're like, oh, you get a book deal, your press does all of that. No. So while I'm doing all of that, it felt really familiar. It was just like, okay. And then you have these little miracles where, someone that you met at Lambda Literary back in the day says, let's sit down and talk about your work, and that's what you did for me. And we were able to connect, and you allowed me such a wonderful platform because you knew someone at the Brooklyn Rail, and it was just like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. And so there are all these like incredible opportunities that just come from friendship and networking. And that is, yes, part of the culture, and as it should be. But also, I just think some clarity, right? Like, that's what I try to do in my poems, revise for clarity. How can we revise the system so that someone who couldn't afford to go to a conference, in California, someone who's not able to, meet with people at an MFA because it's just not possible, whether it's, full term or low residency, like, there's so many stories that need to be told, like news stories and voices that must be forwarded, and how can we make it possible to give access to those people, so it's not like, the 80s where you're walking down the street and someone from, I don't know, Ford modeling agency says, you're the one. I'm going to make you a model. I'm going to make you a star. Like, we don't need that in publishing. It has to be um, a more even playing field. If we're not doing that as a literary culture because we're afraid that the space will be too open and that too many voices will come in, and there are people who just, kind of deserve to be published because for whatever reason they represent the canon, then I think we need to, as a community, reassess our values. And if you're afraid of a novice coming in and like distracting from the work that you're doing, well, then maybe you just sit down a little longer with the work that you're doing.
Yes, yes. Screw scarcity in any
Yeah.
art form. Screw the scarcity mindset. And I
Mhm.
think, to your point, you and I are privileged in a lot of ways that are inherent, and I think natural and nurtured in terms of familial stuff, and then in terms of talent and intellect. But if it took all of this perfect storm for us to get in these spaces, then how much talent just isn't even in proximity to it? And I think, thank you for sort of being intentional with your words earlier, because I think I want to utilize this space to kind of reimagine access,
Mhm.
and maybe not have so many of us be categorized or self-categorized as outliers,
Mhm.
because there's so much more of us to be seen. One thing I really enjoyed hearing you talk about was in when you're teaching, because I do think of you as a teacher. I mean, we've taught in tandem
Right.
before for the James Baldwin event that we did. Um, I'm really interested in what you said about, you know, sort of trying to guide people as much as you can. I mean, I teach at 92Y every summer,
Mhm.
and it's like this high school writers colony, for the lack of a better term. It's just 4 days. It's so fun, and any part of me that was not a snob, but just being like, I can't discipline anybody. I deal in dangerous ideas, and I don't
Mhm.
need a parental slip, please. Like
Mhm.
that kind of thing. As soon as I hit 92Y with these high school kids, it's just a joy. And some of them are better writers than my college students, and some of them are just who we're describing and maybe who we are. Um, some of these kids are like just native New Yorkers across demographics, but and particularly class. Not everyone's a little rich kid. They get in by virtue of writing in and being chosen.
Mhm.
That all that to say is I leave time open on the last day, a couple of hours, and I'm just like, the day before I tell them to prepare questions if they have any professional questions, and I just let them rip, um, and when I give the assignment, they say, well, we don't know what to ask. I'm like, think about it. And when they
Mhm.
come 2 day up, it's a million questions because
Mhm.
this whole process. I mean, from a literary culture standpoint and from budding writers, it's fascinating to be on the inside of some of these workings. Um, so what kind of advice have you given, if you can remember any?
Sure. I mean, listen, again, I didn't know what to ask. If I were one of the students or the participants of your 92Y class and you gave that generous space where you said, ask me any question, I would have been one of the people just looking around the room, just waiting to write down the answers, but I wouldn't have even have known what to ask. So I think one of the first things that I caution against is because you're sitting with people who are usually like burning with urgency, right? And there's nothing like the urgency of wanting to express your story for the first time, like as a collection. I try to remind young writers that you're going to have many movements in your life. There's going to be a lot of fluidity. There's growth, that's one of the wonderful things about literature and the humanities is that, and poems in particular, is that they're able to hold contradictions and there's nuance there. And, the truth that you are burning with today, that is going to morph into something else eventually. And so what is most important, to rush to publication or to really hone in on your process, right? Your process of being a reader, being a writer, understanding craft. I remember when I took my first visual art classes in college. And, before we went to the classes, we were told, listen, you've got to get all of these, tools and all of this like equipment. And oh my gosh, it was so expensive. But I came in with my glass palette board. I came in with my acrylic paints. I came in with everything. That didn't make me an artist just because I had everything. I had to learn. Okay, yeah, I knew what I wanted to draw. I knew like, the what I wanted to paint. I knew how the things I wanted to create and I knew my perspective, but that doesn't mean that I understood the craft of how to make that possible. And also, I didn't understand the difference between my eye and the eye of the student sitting next to me. I didn't understand the difference in our hands. Some of us have looser hands when we draw, others have more a tighter hand. And so learning all of that was the most important information because I learned what kind of painter I could be. So the process of learning what kind of writer you are is essential. And that Without that, you're just going to be lost to the trends, right? So doing that work is most vital and important. And I stress that it's really important to read. B, you get an idea of the landscape that you're walking into, right? C, when you begin publishing, you want to publish in spaces that you know. So that means you're reading the work that's out there, and you want to work on a poem until you feel like, okay, in this moment, it's saying what I need to say. I've said what I wanted to say in the space of this moment, and you can just kind of walk away from it. So, tip number 1 for beginner writers, when you write your first collection of poems, right? That takes you out of the running for a lot of early prizes meant for emerging writers. And that is something I didn't know. I knew was I wanted to be like on the scene. I mean, I didn't really want to be on the scene, but I knew I kind of had to be on the scene to understand the lay of the land, right? That's the respect that I say to my students you need to have for your industry and the arena. So I would go to a bunch of readings. I got a lot of feedback on those readings, and I would speak to people and find out, where they were reading, like, who else was reading there, like what they were writing, have all those conversations that introduces me into the conversation just by being there. Then by doing that, an editor reached out and was like, "Oh, do you have more poems?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I have more poems." She said, "I'd love for you to send me your poems." So I sent them my poems, and they wanted to publish it. They were like, "We would love to publish this collection." My first response was, "Of course you would. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, you want to publish my poems? I want people to read my poems." Seems like, it's a deal.
Mhm.
So they like sent me a contract, but I knew that I didn't know enough to sign the contract, right? I didn't know. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to keep this in my inbox, like with all the other unread emails. So they sent it to me, and a year goes by and I don't hear anything. There's no communication. By this time, I begin my MFA. I'm starting to meet people. I'm like, oh, my book, they're already advertising that my book is going to come out. And then, without checking in with me, they advertised that, oh, actually, no, they pushed it back like another year. And I was just like, okay, but they didn't check in with me about that. That's kind of weird, right? And I would check in with people for my MFA, and they were like, oh, yeah, this is usually happening. And, these kinds of conversations. So then I was like, oh, I'm finding out more information. You know what? Thanks so much for offering to publish my book. I'm just going to say I don't feel like it's ready yet, and I'm not going to do it. So I took my book back. I used my personal agency and I took my book back. And it was the best decision I could have made, because the book that I would have published with them then is just a shadow of what I published years later after completing my MFA. Completely different experience. I would not have made the splash that this one did. And also the press was so much smaller. Again, people who are volunteering because, this is not their job. With this press, they were one of those really small presses. And also, after I took my book away and I started finding out about like other online publications that I didn't know about because I wasn't on the scene that much. I was very isolated. And then I was like, oh, you can publish here and you can publish here. So I just sent out my poems one by one. And each poem I sent out, I put my entire heart and soul into it. And I sent out that poem, and they accepted the poem. And then people started knowing who I was, and that created a little buzz. And now I'm really creating a stronger portfolio, and I'm getting to know other people, and they're getting to know me. And then after I graduated from MFA, I was solicited by Alice James. I forgot to say that while I was doing my MFA, I also found out about prizes. I had no idea about prizes. What did I know about prizes? Okay. But prizes are support. It's like support for emerging writers. It increases like your profile. They give you like money, which helps support you. You can be supported by prizes. You know, you get to do a special reading, which is something like all of these wonderful things that I had no idea about. And had I gone ahead and published that first offer, like if I'd gone ahead with that offer and published the debut then, I would have had a book on, I would have had a published book like on my record, and I would not have been eligible for the 92Y Discovery Prize, you know, for all of these other prizes, for these conferences where they give you a scholarship if you're an unpublished. So many of these like scholarships and these awards and prizes, there's so many for unpublished authors that I would not have had access to, which helped me become a better writer, which is what they want you to be, which is the whole point of them. So I tell my students and participants about that experience, how I almost, it was a close call. I almost missed it. And had I not had conscious contact with that little voice inside me, that agency, I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast with you.
That's probably true.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And, gone to Lambda Literary and done all those things. So listen, I'm saying if you want to be great, but like move with intention, go slowly, understand, have respect, have the same respect that you want others to pay to your work and your voice for the landscape, for the industry, like have that reverence, know that what you're doing is important. And so the way that you move inside of the system is important. And the way that you treat other people is important. All of that. So that's something that I tell people. And then also it's really important to have a reader or two. Listen, I'm very much, when it comes to my writing, an isolationist. I'll do a workshop, and if I hear something that's not for me, I don't worry about it. I'm not precious about it, and that's another thing. Like, we all have our own relationships with our work. But when I say I'm not precious about my work, I mean, I have faith in my best efforts. And I have faith that whatever it is I want to say, I'm going to say it at the end of the day, right? It's just a matter of getting there. So whenever someone has a critique or a comment, that critique or comment really is teaching me something about their experience and their process. And it's just my job to graciously, be there and listen. I don't have to take it into my work. I don't have to hold to it closely if it doesn't align with what I see, right? Because I know, I have faith. I'm I'm going to write the hell out of this at some point. I may not know how, but it's going to be good. I have faith in it. And that's how I try to encourage people to move, with that faith, with that fun, that fearlessness, because at the end of the day, no one has to write to live, right? I mean, it's debatable, but I'm saying literally, you don't have to write to live. You have to eat to live. You don't necessarily have to write to live, but it's something that we're doing, and we need to take pleasure in it, even if it's hard. If there's no pleasure in the work that you're doing, if there's no pleasure in some of the interaction that you have with people in the community, if there's no pleasure outside of yourself, then it's time to think about and investigate why and how we can make that possible, And I think that's really important to your writing process, to your spirit, to the way you conduct yourself as a literary citizen. And listen, I am not perfect by any means. I make mistakes and snafus, but I don't define myself by them. There's a time to talk. There's a time to listen. There's a time to learn, and we all move forward and do the best we can. And then life ends. And then life ends. And what's left, if you're lucky, are some thoughts, words, and experiences.
Age wisdom. I love it. And now it's time for a segment called House of Ultraviolet Walks. And in this segment, we highlight the achievements of unsung literary heroes in ball culture. Today, the category is poetry. I'd like to highlight my co founding father, Brad Walrond, an epic poet. All of his work deals with the intersections of being a New Yorker, um, an artist, a writer, Black, Caribbean, of immigrant parents, gay in New York City in the 80s and 90s, HIV health advocacy. There's so many power punches in his work. In particular, his poem 1986 deals with the effects of the HIV/AIDS crisis in New York City, the decimation it caused, infusing house music, activism, and bombastic poetry into a poem that is just immaculate. And it echoes the larger legacy of ball culture. It's bold, performative, and unapologetically alive. So, to you, founding father of the House of Ultraviolet, Brad Walren, we thank you for serving legendary literary realness. And to you we say, tens across the board. All right, so listen,
Yeah.
I have a signature question
Mhm.
that I'm going to ask every guest after you, and starting with you.
Mm.
Um, and it's kind of in line with what we've been talking about, but it's not necessarily about literature or the industry. But what is one thing that you see about the world or you know about the world that you wish everyone else could see?
That's a good one. It's so beautiful. I'm just like taking a moment to live in the generosity of that question. That I wish that everyone else could see. That it's not that serious. You know, whatever the reason for the self-flagellation, the shame, the guilt, whatever, you know, wherever it hurts, wherever there's the trauma, that is all important. That is all sacred. And also, in the greater scheme of things, in the larger perspective, there is a consciousness that is so large and sweeping that everything that we are biting our lips, trying to do with so much tension. We're so fastidious about where this comma is going to go and what does it mean, to use this semicolon, and what is it saying about me as a writer that I don't know if I should use this semicolon. I think that the gesture of wanting to get something right is so beautiful and is so sacred, and also is something that must be released. We cannot cleave too closely to anything. It is necessary if you want to exist for as long as possible in this life. If you want to go and be able to move with the fluidity, it is necessary to wear life like a loose and flowing garment, because anything can happen at any time. And we will have to do what those who came before us, what those who come after us are forced to do, and that is adjust. It is important to be able to adjust. And there is a gesture of love and grace and faith and spirituality and all of those things in that. And that's really what I want people to be able to see. Your passion is important. Your values are important. That speaks to who you are. And within them, there is always room to move and create more space for everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. I can't wait for the rest of the episodes. And thank you for taking a moment, because I know you have a lot of projects, and I feel like you're someone who continues to give back to the community in ways that are earnest and true to who you are. And I think that's an amazing lesson. And also, it speaks to understanding your own value. And I'm just like, I feel like I'm learning from that. When I think of myself as like being useless sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I don't even have anything to give. I'm all out. My tank is empty. And then I see someone doing something that is so in line with who they are, and it's authentic, and they're giving back authentically, not like, oh, I'm going to be an inspiration. It's like, oh, this is something that I learned that I can do, that I can pass on, and there's a need for this. And I just think that if we all did that, that the world would be just a friendlier place, and a lovelier place. So thank you.
And that's our first episode. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Omotara James. Her award winning debut collection of poems called Song of My Softening is available through Alice James Books. You can find her online through Alice James, but you can also follow her at Omotara James on Instagram. Stay with us. In the next couple of weeks, we have some great guests coming up. Our very special Halloween episode is featuring my friend, writer, educator, and horror aficionado, Dianca London Potts. It was a really cool conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. We also have a very special episode that will cover Comic-Con, true outliers. So nerds, black nerdom, blurreddom, as I learned to call ourselves. Also, my dear friend Colin Bedell, who is the host and runner of Queer Cosmos. So if you're into astrology, you're not going to want to miss that. We're going to talk about witchy stuff, and I think he's going to read my chart for me. We'll see. Thank you for joining us. Hope you stay with us. All right.